That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
It took a nationwide effort for Neil Armstrong to speak those words and walk where we had only dreamed of going.
Well, Central Texas News Now sat down with Don Pearson, one of the hundreds of Texans who worked to make history.
Don Pearson's roots are deeply planted in the Texas soil.
We come from a very large extended family. I'm full-blooded Norwegian. My great-great-great-great-grandfather came to Texas in 1853, so our roots are deep.
But his eyes have always pointed towards the heavens.
I like stars, believe it or not. We lived out in the country. There was no electricity in our house. We lived off of kerosene lanterns and a wood stove. Good Lord, it sounds like I'm a pioneer. But it was a good life. It was a well-loved life, a big family, like I said. But being what I wanted to be when I grew up, I didn't ever think about that. I knew I didn't want to be a farmer, because Daddy took me out in the fields when I was 5 and 6 to help him dig post holes, and that's not fun.
From the country to the classroom, Don Pearson made his way to Baylor University in 1954.
I figured a mathematician could work in almost any field.
He graduated in 1958. The great space race was on, and physicists were in high demand.
I decided to stay at Baylor and teach in the physics department for 2 or 3 years because my wife got free tuition. And she got to within 1 year of graduating, and I just couldn't stand it any longer. I had to get down to Houston. I was the 412th employee out of 15,000. So we just we were working out of warehouses on Telephone Road and in Houston. Space Center wasn't built yet. The day I started work, John Glenn went into suborbit.
In Houston, Pearson lived among the NASA community.
Neil Armstrong lived 3 doors down from me, and his son Ricky was in my scout troop. His next door neighbor was Ed White, the astronaut that was killed in the fire in Florida, and his son, Ed Jr., was in my scout troop.
But life in Southeast Texas wasn't all fun and games.
I did travel an awful lot. We set up networks in Norway to detect, we monitored the solar flares by their action in the auroral zone. So I was in the auroral zone with balloons and rockets all the time, all around the world, except in Russia, of course. We got a lot of stuff around the world that a lot of people don't know about. The spacecraft is never far from safety. Main thing that we did was we worked on simulation. They had a big group at NASA that did nothing but simulation. We'd sit in the center, the screens would have all the instructions on it, and they would sit there trying to screw things up. They would cause a fire in one engine, or they'd do this, or they'd get the water polluted. They were always making up problems, and we had to solve them in real time. I spent more time working on missions when there weren't real missions going on. That's how we made our living, is solving problems before they occurred in the real thing.
And when he wasn't working, Pearson often stayed on to watch the next shift.
Because things were pretty exciting when people were in orbit. You got to understand, we didn't know whether all this was going to work or not. It was do or die. I mean, we put it on the line.
There is weather out in space called deep space weather. It consists of meteorites going thousands of miles per hour, some the size of basketballs.
When the spacecraft lifted off, I was through. I'd made my forecast, and I had to live with it. We didn't know whether we were going to be successful or not. I'm sure if I took a survey of all my friends, it'd be more than 50% said they're not coming back.
Altitude 4,200.
Houston, you're a go for landing, over. Roger, understand, go for landing, 3,000 feet.
You're looking great.
Watch when they land on the moon. You see people jump up and scream and hold their hands up. We were wound up so tight we just couldn't hardly stand it. I showed them a film on the camera that I had. It shook so bad I can't even recognize what it was about. And when they made it back home, that was heaven. I took a week off for the first time in 7 years.
Pearson says after the moon landing in 1969, something clicked in the minds of Americans everywhere.
And we started talking space travel. Now we're going to Mars. We've got satellites around every moon in the system. We're ready to go. People are now aggressively thinking about space travel, whereas if it had failed, it would have just died. That'd have been the end of it.
And while Pearson was part of fulfilling John F. Kennedy's dream to land a man on the moon before the decade was out, he's worried about the strides we've made since.
I got to tell you honestly, I worry about the 50 years that we lost. Totally wasted. No, well, not totally. There's always a little bit going on.
But he says he's hopeful for the future of the space program.
All I can say if there's any young people watching this, get into science because NASA's coming back.